You know, we often think of grammar as this one giant dusty rule book, right? But what if it's actually more like a collection of different architectural blueprints, where each one is designed for a totally different purpose? Today, we're going to dive into these hidden systems that really structure the language we use every single day. And you'll see pretty quickly that the idea of what's correct isn't nearly as simple as we were taught.
So let's just kick things off with a pretty fundamental question, one that honestly challenges a lot of what we probably all learned in school. And that question is there really only one correct grammar? The answer, as we're about to find out, is, well, it's way more complex and a whole lot more fascinating than a simple yes or no.
Okay, so to really unpack that big question, here's our game plan. First, we'll meet the architects of correctness. Then we'll check out the actual blueprints of language. After that, we're going to see language in the wild. And to wrap it all up, we'll peek inside the teacher's toolkit. All right, first up, the architects of correctness. In this first part, we're really going to focus on the types of grammar that are all about establishing rules and defining what we think of as proper language. And that brings us straight to traditional grammar. Now, this is almost certainly the one you remember from your school days. It's kind of the OG framework, you know? It's all about classifying language into different parts, nouns, verbs, adjectives, all that stuff, and figuring out tenses and sentence types. It's a lot like how a biologist would classify different species in the animal kingdom. The whole approach here is very top-down. With traditional grammar, it's all about correctness and accuracy. So you learn the rule first, and then you're expected to apply it. This method is, not gonna lie, really useful when you're studying for standardized exams, but, and this is a big but, it's definitely not the whole story when it comes to language. And right alongside that, you have prescriptive grammar. They're very closely related. So if traditional grammar is the textbook that neatly classifies everything, think of prescriptive grammar as the super strict rule book that tells you exactly what to do and what not to do. Its entire job is to prescribe, to lay down the law on what's considered correct, especially in more formal settings. So yeah, this is the grammar that tells you what you should say to sound correct. It's the language of your formal essays, those important professional emails, and big public speeches. It's all about keeping a certain standard for accuracy and clarity. Basically, it's the stuff your English teacher was grading you on. Okay, and this right here brings us to maybe the single most important distinction we're going to talk about today. It's prescriptive versus descriptive. So prescriptive grammar, as we just saw, prescribes what people should say. It sets the rules of the game. Descriptive grammar, on the other hand, just describes what people actually do say. It just watches how the game is really played. This difference is absolutely crucial, so try to keep it in mind as we move forward. All right, so we've looked at the rule makers, the ones focused on correctness. Now let's go a layer deeper and check out the actual blueprints of language. We're going to move beyond just the surface level rules and try to uncover the underlying systems and patterns that make our language work at all. And this leads us to structural grammar. Now, this approach takes a different tack. Instead of zooming in on individual words and what to call them, it views language as a whole system of sentence patterns or structures. The main focus here is on how sentences are formed, all about the word order. So how is it taught? Well, this method is all about repetition, about creating habits. Think back to those language drills. This is a pen. This is a book. The whole idea is that by drilling these core patterns over and over, learners, and this is especially helpful for beginners, start to internalize the basic structures of the language. It helps build a really solid foundation. Okay, now we're going to get a little more theoretical. This is transformational generative grammar. And this one isn't really about rules written down in a book. It's a theory about what's happening inside the human mind. It's trying to explain this incredible thing we do, how we can generate a practically infinite number of sentences we've never heard before, all from a limited set of rules. The key idea here is this concept of deep structure versus surface structure. The deep structure is the core meaning you want to convey, and the surface structure is the actual sentence you say out loud. This theory was a total game changer for modern linguistics because it really highlighted the creative power of language. But because it's so abstract and complex, it's not something you typically use to, actually teach a language in a classroom. Okay, so we've seen the rule books and we've seen the blueprints. Now let's step out of the classroom and the lab and go into the wild. Let's see how language actually works in the real world, in our day-to-day lives. And that brings us to functional grammar. This approach completely changes the question we're asking. Instead of asking, is this sentence grammatically correct, it asks, what is this sentence trying to do? It's all about connecting a grammatical structure to its real-life purpose, to its function. So with functional grammar, context is everything. You don't just memorize a rule, you understand why you're using it. For instance, why would you choose to say, I've been to Paris, instead of I went to Paris? There's a reason, a functional difference in meaning. The whole goal is to build real, practical skills for communicating effectively. And now we circle back to that other side of the coin we talked about earlier. Remember? Descriptive grammar. This is the grammar of a linguist, of an observer. The goal here isn't to make judgments or correct anyone. It's simply to record and analyze how people actually use language, how it's spoken naturally out in the world. What this means is that descriptive grammar fully accepts that language is a living thing, that it's always changing. It's the approach that notes, without judgment, that people now often use the word literally for figurative emphasis. It values slang, it values regional dialects, all the natural ways that words and meanings evolve over time. It's really not a rule book at all. It's more like a living, breathing document of how we communicate. Okay, so we've got all these different ways of looking at language, right? We've got the rule makers, the pattern finders, and the observers. But how does a teacher actually use any of this stuff in a real classroom? Well, for our final section, we're going to open up the teacher's toolkit and see how all this theory gets translated into practice. And this is where something called pedagogical grammar enters the picture. Now, this isn't really a standalone theory like the others. It's more of a practical approach that kind of borrows bits and pieces from all the other grammars we've talked about. Its one and only goal is to take all this complex stuff and make it understandable and accessible for a student who's trying to learn. You can really think of it as the bridge that connects dense, complicated linguistic theory with what actually works in a classroom. The rules get simplified, the examples are made to be relatable, and the goal, always, is just to help the student learn in the most effective way possible. It's basically grammar made practical. And this really brings us to the most important conclusion of this whole discussion, and it's this. There is no single best grammar. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. Every single one of these architectural blueprints we've looked at has its own unique, valuable purpose. And truly effective language teaching means knowing how to draw from all of them. Ultimately, it really all boils down to finding the right balance. A truly effective communicator, whether you're a student or a teacher, needs three things. You need to know the rules for accuracy. You need to understand the context that gives those rules meaning, and you need the practical skills for application, using it all in the real world. And that leaves us with one final question. But this one is for you to think about. When you're living your own life, which grammar lens do you find yourself using the most? Like, when you write an important email, are you a total prescriptivist, making sure every rule is followed? Or when you're just hanging out with your friends, are you more of a descriptivist, just observing and enjoying the way people really talk? It's interesting to think about, isn't it?